Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Obviously, I'm not Brother Farron. If he's watching, I'm not Brother Farron again. He's apparently he was running a fever from what I heard last night, so y'all keep him in prayer. I'm not really sure. I hadn't heard anything other than that. I'm sure he's not feeling great, so y'all keep him in prayer. And I was more than happy to fill in for him again tonight. We'll get started like we always do with any prayer requests they might have. Yeah. It's true. Pray for me too. I'm having trouble with my knee. The doctor told me Dad was supposed to stay off of it for 4 weeks. So I'm trying to figure that out. Yeah. So y'all pray for me on that. Okay.
My cousin that I've been requesting prayer for, Colby, she passed away.
Oh gosh. Okay. Any others? Let's all stand. We'll go to the Lord together tonight. Bless you, Father. Thank you, God, for your blessings. Thank you for your mercy, your grace. Thank you for all the good things you give us, Lord. Jesus, I pray that you'll touch us tonight. God, your Spirit, Lord, would be here with us. I pray that you'll help us, God, be ready to hear and understand your word tonight. Teach us tonight, Lord. Draw us closer to you, Lord. Help us all have a spirit of love for one another. I pray, Jesus, you know each request that was voiced before you tonight. You know everyone's needs. And I pray for peace and joy. God, all the things that everybody needs, Lord. Oh, God. Bless you, Jesus. Praise your holy name, Lord. Bless you, God. Bless you, Lord. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 5. And if you've skipped ahead and looked at chapter 5, you know it's only 12 verses long, which may mean we get out of here early tonight. I don't know. We'll see. We'll start off like I usually do. We went over 1 Samuel chapter 4, and those that were here went over chapter 4 with me. Could you help me remember what was in chapter 4, some highlights? It was a big chapter, right? There's a lot of stuff happened in chapter 4. Can you help me remember a few of those things? All right, the ark was captured by the Philistines. That's a big deal.
And that, of course, means that Israel lost the battle.
So Israel lost a battle with the Philistines. That's true. It's another big deal. How many men did they lose? You remember? How many? Okay. And the 30,000 the second time. That's a lot of men. Ah, very good. So we also lost Eli and his 2 sons. Eli. All right. She got that out of there. It was. I think it was more polite than that. Well, he was of old age and heavy, right? I think is what it said, wasn't it? Yeah, he was a old man and heavy, it said. Big bone, husky fella. True. Y'all are doing great. Anything else?
The daughter-in-law of Eli gave birth when she heard about it. And she named the son, or they named him Ichabod.
Ichabod. That's right.
It meant glory is departed.
Glory has departed from Israel. That's right. Eli's daughter-in-law, I think this is the wife of Phinehas. She was not ready to give birth yet, but she was very pregnant. And when word came back that her husband had died, and her brother-in-law died, and her father-in-law had died, and the ark was taken, it said that she immediately went into labor. And she died giving birth, but right before she died, she named the child Ichabod because the glory had departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken, it said. Very good. So that's everything that happened in chapter 4. I wish I could tell you chapter 5 was as dramatic and captivating and so much stuff happened, but not as much happens in chapter 5. But there is a lot to talk about. And usually in chapter 5, it brings up hemorrhoids. And that kind of gets your focus off everything else, right? So it's easy to skip through the chapter and maybe not focus on some other things because it is what it is. We're going to try to dig in a little bit tonight and see what treasures chapter 5 have for us. Starting in first verse, and the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. Now remember, Ebenezer is where the battle was. They're bringing it to a city called Ashdod. In Ashdod, there's a temple of Dagon. In verse 2, it said, when the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. So let's just stop right there on verse 2. Who in the world is Dagon? Anybody familiar with this guy? All right, we got two things. He's a Philistine's god, and Barry says he's a big stone statue. I would agree in both accounts, yes. Does anybody know what the statue might have looked like or anything about this god that the Philistines had?
He's the god of the sea, the grain, and the storms.
Very good. She said he was the god of the sea, the grain, and storms. Anybody know what he looked like?
I tend to believe he had his hands up.
Okay. Why not? Makes sense.
Didn't he have a fish's tail?
How do you know all this stuff? You're amazing. You're amazing.
He preached about it, and I went home and studied it.
Oh, wow. That's right. He was considered like a fish god. He was from all my research, you would kind of imagine Dagon looking like a merman. You've seen mermaids, right? Those are the woman versions. A merman would be like the male version of a mermaid. So he was like half human, and then the rest of him was like a fish's tail. And he was believed to be the god of fertility, but fertility like in agriculture and stuff. Like he was good for the crops or whatever. He was the god of the Philistines, and he had temples throughout the Middle East. He had one in Gaza, and if you go back and study in Judges, you'll find out that that's the temple Samson destroyed. So the temple Samson destroyed was a temple of Dagon. Also, if you study out a little bit, I can't remember what, First Chronicles, I can't remember, but King Saul's head is displayed in a Dagon temple also. So there were multiple temples throughout the land. And that's a little background, a little history on Dagon. In verse 3 it said, and when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. There is a lot to be said about that one verse. There really is. So what immediately jumps out to you? The Philistines take the ark from Israel. They take it to their temple. They put it in their temple with Dagon. They go to bed. They get up the next morning. They come back to the temple, and the statue of Dagon is laying face down on the ground. All right? Uncle Bill says he bowed down. What else do you want to add to it? What thoughts do you have about that? And I know you've read this a lot of times, I'm sure. What sticks out to you? What do you think of when you read this? No one higher than our God, okay? That's good. Good.
It's interesting, though, that the reason that the Philistines have it is because the power didn't go with the ark.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
the heart was not right.
Mm-hmm.
But now when there's another worship idol, then God arises and says, no, this won't be.
I think you bring up a great point, because they marched the ark into battle and they lost as if the presence of God wasn't there. But then this same ark gets put in a temple, and this statue miraculously is laying on the ground before it.
There is
No God like Jehovah. I would agree with that too. Well, the first question is, what's going on here? Why is this happening? On the surface, it looks like God has caused this statue to bow down to him, which I believe is what's going on. But what's God really trying to do here? Why did the statue fall to the ground? And if you really think about it, God is glorifying himself, is he not, right here? Bringing himself glory. Which is interesting, because it means that God doesn't need Israel to be glorified. He can glorify himself. And if he doesn't need Israel to be glorified, and you know Israel wasn't glorifying him, it means that he doesn't need us to glorify him either.
We need to remember too, however, that the ark isn't God,
Right.
but it is a sanctified vessel from the tabernacle, and it represented God.
Right.
And I'll hush.
Well, okay. You can keep talking if you want to. Yeah. Right. I've got wrote here that God will glorify himself. Sometimes when men disgrace the glory of God, we fear God will go without glory. We think that the glory has departed, and that's what Israel thought. But when men and women will not glorify God, God can and will glorify himself. And so, just like Phinehas' wife, when she was in labor, that's what she said, I'm going to name this child Ichabod because the glory has departed from Israel. But here you see God giving himself glory, this causing the statue to bow down before him. So that's part A of this verse, right? Part B would be, what should the Philistines think? What should the Philistines do when they walk in the temple and see this? Say it again.
They should fear God.
Fear God. Shouldn't we fear God? Yeah. Were they doomed because they took the ark? Okay. Were they cursed at this point? Think so? Because I don't see the curse coming until here in a little bit later. But right now, it's just causing the statue to bow down before him. I guess what I'm saying is, when the Philistines stole the ark and took it, were they immediately cursed and or doomed?
I think if they would have took the example of the one they worshipped, bowed down, then there would have been a different outcome.
So you think there could have been a different outcome? Interesting. I'm in line to believe that. I'm in line to think about that. I mean, God is showing the Philistines who he is. He's showing his glory here. The Philistines can react however they want to react. What if the Philistines had been like, wow, this is the one true God. I'm going to worship this God. Would they have been cursed? How would things have been different? It's something to think about. And if that's a possibility, then what is God really doing here? Is God just trying to show off? Or is God trying to show people who he is so that they'll fear him and maybe establish a relationship with him in some way, or come to know who he is? So that's something to think about.
If we could go back to when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the Israelite camp, and they went such a shout up,
Mm-hmm.
and the Philistines said, we're doomed,
Mm-hmm.
because the God of the Israelites has come into the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their idea was, Dagon is such a great God, and he has delivered the Israelite God into our hands.
Mm-hmm. I think that is an attitude that needs to be discussed. So, and that's something I have in my notes too. If the Philistines basically said, don't be scared of these Israelites and their God, quit yourself like a man is what the verse has said, but it's saying conduct yourself like a man, stand up, be brave, don't be fearful, and let's fight to the death if we have to. And they won. So it's easy for them to think that they're better than the God of Israel, or they beat the God of Israel. Or it's easy to think that maybe their God's better than the God of Israel, right? So that is definitely an attitude the Philistines could have when they're bringing the ark back and they put it in the temple. Maybe they have this attitude or mindset that the God of Israel is not really that big a deal, right? We won the battle. We beat him.
This was a spoils of war. They had taken the covenant.
Right. That was spoils of war, that's right. It was kind of their trophy.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of their trophy, the ark was. And they put that trophy in the temple of Dagon. This is who we beat. We beat Israel. But then this statue falls down before it, and that should have changed everything for the Philistines. Maybe they are not as powerful as they thought, or maybe this God's not as weak as they thought. But it's something that I think that we should realize is that I'm not so sure the Philistines were doomed yet. I think they could have reacted however they wanted to react. So let's find out how they reacted. What did they do when they found him? They found Dagon. It says that they took Dagon and set him in his place again, is what the verse says. So what does that tell you? What was their reaction?
They didn't know why he failed.
Didn't know why he fell, or wouldn't admit why he fell. And they were just going to continue on as business as usual.
Isn't it amazing that they are the ones that put him back up there?
Yeah,
If he was really a god,
that's true, yeah. Put yourself back up there, Dagon. Now, thinking about that, though, I always try to tie this stuff, especially stuff in the Old Testament that we read as like really awesome material. This stuff is super relatable to today. We as a people, even in our own churches, are almost identical to these people of Israel. I mean, we go through the same problems, we have the same reactions, we have the same mindsets. We just don't always realize it. We're reading it thinking, man, they're a bunch of idiots, but they never realize, like, we do the same stuff. So I always try to relate it to today, and so that was their reaction. Here's God doing something, and it should have caught their attention. They got to make a choice how they're going to react, and their reaction is to just take Dagon, put it back up like nothing happened. And so does that happen today? Do people experience God in any way today, and they just kind of go, well, let's just pretend that didn't happen? And they try to ignore it, and they try to forget about it. That's what I kind of wanted to put in our brain as we went forward here. So they put him back. In verse 4 it said, when they rose early on the morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face again. But the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. So it's a little different than what happened. First of all, again, God's glorifying himself. Second, it's becoming really hard to come up with excuses as to why this has happened, right? It's becoming kind of hard to account for it happening 2 nights in a row this way. And it's just some history part of this. So I don't know what the statue looked like. I'm kind of like Uncle Bill. He said I imagine that the statue's got his hands up. And the reason I think of that is when he fell, I could see everything across here being broken off. Because his head was broke off, and it said his hands were broke off. And all that was left was his stump. And it also said that when he fell, it was broken upon what the Bible calls a threshold. I don't know if you noticed that or not. And we know a threshold is what? Do what? Yeah, the entrance, kind of like the bottom of a door, right? We call that the threshold. So I assume it fell over somehow and it broke across that threshold. So let's get that in your mind, and then let's see how they reacted to this. It said in verse 5, therefore neither the priests of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house will tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod even unto this day. So what was their reaction this time? They were scared of the threshold. Exactly. They weren't like, whoa, this God of Israel is the real deal, or he's powerful. They're like, ooh, let's not. Not even the priests will stand on the threshold now. It's the threshold that did all this, right? That's what happened. again, do you see that today? Can you relate that today? Do you see that kind of attitude today where God's obviously doing something and people just can't accept the fact that he's doing something and they'll blame it on anything else? They'll even look really stupid just to try to pretend that God's not moving, God's not doing something. One scripture I wanted to reference, and I didn't have time to get it typed up. It's been a little bit of a day. I was in Zechariah? Not Zechariah. What is that? It's a Z name. Someone help me remember. Zephaniah, that's it. I'm going to have to go to my table of contents to find that one. Zephaniah chapter 1. It's on page 445 in my Bible. I just thought this was interesting, and you might like to hear it too. I'm going to read the first 9 verses or so. The word of the Lord which came unto Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, king of Judah. So the king of Judah at the time is Josiah. I will utterly consume all things from off the land, saith the Lord. This is God speaking. I will consume man and beast. I will consume the fowls of heaven and the fishes of the sea and the stumbling blocks which with the wicked, and I will cut off man from off the land, saith the Lord. I will also stretch out mine hand upon Judah, upon all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, and the name of the cherubims with the priests, and them that worship the host of heaven upon the housetops, and them that worship and that swear by the Lord and that swear by Malcolm. What does it sound like who does it sound like he's against here? Other gods, right? Idol worshipers, people that worship strange gods, and them that are turned back from the Lord, and those that have not sought the Lord, nor inquired for him. Hold thy peace at the presence of the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. For the Lord hath prepared a sacrifice, he hath bid his guests, and it shall come to pass in the day of the Lord's sacrifice that I will punish the princes and the king's children, and all such as are clothed with strange apparel. In the same day also will I punish all those that leap on the threshold, which will fill their masters' houses with violence and deceit. And if you translate that, it really comes out that leaps over the threshold, which is kind of interesting because what Zephaniah is referencing here is the Philistines, and he's referencing this particular piece, the threshold at the temple after Dagon fell down and broke, and people wouldn't step on the threshold anymore because of it. It's such a big deal and widely known that Zephaniah actually, God actually, not Zephaniah, refers to the Philistines as those that leap on the threshold. So I thought that was kind of neat. So some notes I've got written here about that before we go any further. And after seeing the superiority of the God of Israel, these Philistine priests had a choice. They could turn from their weak, inferior god Dagon and begin serving the mighty, superior Lord of Israel. Isn't that true? Do you think the Philistines had that opportunity? When the ark came in, he didn't kill them for taking the ark. They were able to take it all the way back and put it in a temple. All that happened was the statue fell down. They could have seen this, the priests could have seen this, and they could have said, you know what, we're going to stop worshiping Dagon and we're going to start worshiping this God. They totally could have done that. I don't know what God's reaction would have been. Or they could make a religious tradition instead, which is what they did. They chose the religious tradition, right? From that point forward, the priest of Dagon nor anybody that came into the house could tread on the threshold. These Philistine priests, like men confronted with truth today, rejected God despite the evidence, not because of the evidence. And that's something that we see a lot today. Despite the evidence of God, people reject him. And they wanted to believe it was an accident. And they try to come up with every which way they can to make it an accident. Make it where it's not real. And how could they believe something so ridiculous? Because worshiping the Lord instead of Dagon meant a huge change in thinking and a huge change in living. You know, the Philistine priests were unwilling to make those changes. It was just easier to take Dagon and set him back in his place again. Setting Dagon up, maybe gluing him back together, was a lot easier than admitting who the Lord was. And it's certainly easier than trying to turn from the God they've been worshiping to the real God. And even easier than trying to make the people do the same thing. Do you think that folks don't turn to God just because they think it's hard? You think that comes into account from time to time? I think it does. I sure do. I think a lot of folks think that in order to live the way that we do, to live a Christian life, that they've got to do all this work up front before they can really start off like it's a diet or something. You know, you want to lose weight. You're like, I want to do that. And I'm going to do it. But in order to do it, I've got to get my mind right. I've got to give up all these foods. I've got to start exercising. All that's really hard, and it's discipline. And if I'll do all those things, then I'll start losing weight. And, coming to God's not that way, is it? I've read in Scripture, and I know when I got saved how I came to God, and He says you're just supposed to come as you are. You don't have to worry about changing your life. You don't have to worry about stopping certain things. You're supposed to just come to Him as you are. And I know how it felt when God came in my heart, when He came into my life, and I didn't have to try to stop stuff. I just didn't want to do stuff anymore. My wants changed, right? My desires changed. And I couldn't do that on my own. Jesus did that for me. And it's super easy to stop doing stuff you're not supposed to do when you don't want to do it anymore, right? It's not a discipline thing. You don't have to make yourself not do it. You just don't want to do it. And when you really get a hold of God, you really get that Spirit inside of you, that's how it feels. And it's hard to explain that to somebody that hasn't experienced it. They think they got to stop all that stuff first, or at least be ready to. But really all they got to do is just have faith in Him and just come. And He'll change all of that for Him.
I've had numerous people tell me, when I get good enough, I'll start coming to church. Never can get there.
Right. Never can. Probably never will. And it's
The only way is through grace.
through grace. And it's sad. I hate it when I see that stuff. And you can't make anybody do it either, I've noticed. You can't. It's on them, and it's between them and God. They have to be drawn, and they have to surrender to do it. But there's a lot of folks out there that have that attitude of, I've got to.
Some people that have held on to that for so long, it's crushed.
Yeah.
If they allow, let me just tuck it back here, because if this doesn't work out, then
Yeah.
and they,
Yeah.
I think like, Juan's on him, when he got up and was screaming for the Lord to come, and when he threw what away? His clothes. That's what identified him of who he was. He wasn't going to need anymore. And that's the way we have to be. We have to say we do not need anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But they could have just said, we don't need this. We had to set him up.
Right.
We didn't want him. But a lot of people hold on to that
Yep.
idol system as a crutch, just a comfort.
It's true.
Peace.
It's true. So yeah, I think we see the same thing as much as we've read this and probably thought, man, this is really. I think most of the time when we read this, we just see, wow, God is so powerful because He caused a statue to bow down before Him, and that's true. He is all powerful. He is God, but maybe He's given the Philistines an opportunity to see who He really is, and they could have chose to not worship Dagon anymore, but to worship Him. And there's a lot more that's happening here, I think, than meets the eye. But for whatever reason, the Philistines weren't going to do that. Again, they were willing to just put Dagon back up and pretend like it never happened. In verse 6, it said, "But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them in Ashdod, and boy, was it heavy. He destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coast thereof." They wouldn't listen when God struck down their statue of Dagon. They just set it up again. And when we close our ears to God, He often finds another way to speak to us, but we may not like the way that He speaks to us the second way, right? So let's just talk about it. What in the world are emerods? Hemorrhoids. That's what. If you do some research and reference it, that's what it'll come back as. I'm not going to get into what hemorrhoids are. You can do your own research on that one. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant, okay? But the question is, and I know everybody in here has probably been like, I don't know if anybody else in here is like me, but especially the Old Testament. I can be reading through the Old Testament, man, and I'm enjoying myself, and I'm imagining what it was like, and I will read something in the Old Testament, and I will stop, and I got to like scratch my head, like, what did I just read? Like, what did that just say? Did that just say what I thought it just said? And I got to go back and read it again. I'm like, it did say that. It's just like, there's just crazy stuff out there in the Old Testament, it seems like. It's just little pieces here and there, and it's just such a surprise. You're reading about, yeah, they stole the ark, Dagon's bowing down, and bam, hemorrhoids. And you're like, what happened here? The question is like, that's interesting. Like, if you were God, this sounds like it sounds like a Marianne thing. If you were God, right, is this what you would have thought to do? If not, if this seems unusual to you that God chose this, then the first question that should come up to you naturally would be why? Why did God do this?
Never been anything remotely close to that. You know, it got their attention.
Attention, yes, it definitely got their attention. Have you ever thought about that? Like,
That's a conversation starter.
it is. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, have you ever said, why did he do that? I mean, it's interesting, it's unusual, and it's hard to read it and not laugh. But I don't know if anybody's ever just thought, why would he do that? Like, why he could have rotted their fingers off. He could have, I don't know, every time they walked under a tree, it would slap them in the back of the head. He could have come up with all kinds of crazy stuff to do these people, but this is what he picked. And it's like, have you ever thought about why? I have. I don't know if anybody else has. I mean, it could. I think there's a lot of, I think we could come up with a lot of ideas. And if y'all would like to share your reasons why, I would love to hear them. Let's put it that way. Has anybody ever thought of this question? I'll give you mine later. But have you ever thought of why? And if you have, what do you think? Why do you think God would have chose this? I guess you'd call it punishment. Maybe you could call it a curse.
This, in remembering, I haven't read this in quite a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but in remembering, this was not just a severe case that they had.
There's people dying.
Multitudes died with it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I've experienced a little of that. It's not pleasant, but
It's not pleasant.
just think about a case that's so bad.
Yeah, that some people die. I agree with you. It was a big problem. It was. Anybody thought of why? I mean, I want to hear some folks why. What do you think why did he choose this? It's painful.
I would lean, was it Kim that said this had not happened? Maybe not anything like it. This may have nobody had ever maybe experienced it.
Okay.
And then just out of the blue, here's something it's got to be coming from somewhere.
We gotta be, yeah.
God's doing.
Yeah.
Definitely got their attention, and they knew that it was time to move something.
Something's wrong.
Of course. Eventually, they said this must be because of the God of the Israelites. I can't remember how. But anyway, eventually they send the Ark of the Covenant back.
Right, in verse 7 it said, when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of God of Israel shall not abide with us. for his hand is sore upon us and upon Dagon our God. Any other ideas why he might have chose this particular?
Well, were they not like men of battle? Weren't they, I mean, they seemed like they were always fighting.
Yeah, they seem like they're always fighting the Philistines.
So they were tough.
Manly men, it said, yeah.
Hemorrhoids put the toughest person.
It will.
Kind of like the kidney stone.
Yeah. The great equalizer.
Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 28,
Okay.
which is total reference back to there.
Mm-hmm.
First part of 28, all the way through 14 is a blessing if you obey the Lord and hear his voice and do his commandments. Then at 15 he says, if you don't observe his commandments and statutes, and if you go, he'll bring from there, I don't know how far it goes, but you look at verse 27 of that chapter, it says, the Lord will smite thee with the botch of Egypt and with hemorrhoids and with the scab. So it's part of the curse for not obeying the Lord. For the children
That's
of
good.
Israel, evidently he used it against
You're right on there. It's very reminiscent of one of the plagues of Israel, isn't it?
he said it would be scabs, it would come with itch and whereof thou canst not be healed. So
Awesome. I'm glad you pulled that scripture up. I hadn't read that. That's really good.
terrible affliction there.
It's very similar to like a plague you might have saw in Egypt because it affected everybody. Miraculously, it just showed up. It affected everybody. It was super bad. So you could, hemorrhoids or whatever, but you might could consider this to be a plague. So there's a lot of ways God could have chose to curse them or cause them pain. In kind of my study and what I came up with was I thought, what a way to humiliate somebody. The word humiliation came up for me. And if you want to cause someone pain or whatever, what would be a way to humiliate them? Because that's kind of what he's doing here. It's not just an aggravation or an annoyance or whatever, but he could have killed them in any way he wanted to. He could have caused them pain in any way he wanted to. But it seems like he's being able to do that in a way that also humiliates them too. Or humbles them, right? Humiliate is derived from the same word as humble, I would think. The Philistines beat Israel. They thought, they were better than God, maybe, and they wouldn't bow down to God. They continue to worship their God. Now God can show them not only how powerful he is, but he can bring them down in humility here, right? So he's actually kind of humiliating them through this curse and through this punishment. And I'm not going to get too in-depth on actually what is going on here because I don't know. But I've done a lot of research on it. I've done a lot of study on it, what makes sense to me. A lot of folks will believe that this was a form of the bubonic plague or the Black Death, that caused a lot of tumors, and they can be tumors like in your groin area and cause a lot of death, but most importantly was spread by rats. Not really rats, but the fleas on rats. People thought it was rats. If you go into the next chapter, which we're not into yet, but you'll notice when they give the ark back, they said, I don't want to give the ark back without some kind of offering gift. And they gave two things. Do you remember what they were? Golden hemorrhoids, whatever that is, and golden mice. And it's kind of like, why would they give golden mice? But it's very possible that they figured out whatever it was that they had, the mice, maybe that was the delivery system for everybody to be getting it. And so God would have struck it down, and maybe he used mice to spread it throughout everybody. I'm not really sure, but that might give you an idea. And we know how bad the bubonic plague was, and I'm not saying that's what it is, but it might have been something very similar to that. And there was a lot of death, and it was a terrible, horrible sickness. But this is what struck the camp. This is what struck the Philistines. But you notice it only happened after the Dagon thing happened, right? This didn't happen as soon as they stole the ark. It was kind of like, and if you look closely, God usually gives everybody some kind of opportunity or chance. He kind of shows them who he is, and they gives them an opportunity to worship him. And then when you don't, stuff like this happens. So I believe, again, going back to Dagon falling down on his face, there was more that meets the eye there. I think that was for the Philistines' opportunity to see God for who he was and say, you know what, I'm going to start worshiping that God instead of Dagon, and maybe this wouldn't have happened. Do you think it would have? Do you think if they turned and said, we're not worshiping Dagon anymore, we're going to worship this God, do you think they still would have been struck with hemorrhoids and cursed? It's kind of hard to think that God would do that, right?
It goes back to what you said at the beginning when you got saved.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't want to do what you did.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost makes you think if they had worshiped God, everything would have worked out. And the Ark of the Covenant would have came back to be one.
Yeah, I think this, I can't tell you what would happen, but I can tell you that I feel like something would have been different.
Well, I think through all this too, he's teaching his children a lesson too.
Yeah, there seems to always be a lesson in there for them. Bless their hearts. Well, they're struck down with this humiliating disease of some sort, very painful, killing a lot of them. And they were smart enough to figure out, in verse 7, it said they saw this was happening, and they blamed it on the ark of God. And they said, we got to get this thing out of here. It can't abide with us. And they are actually saying that God's hand is sore upon them, and he's sore upon Dagon, their God. They sent, therefore, and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them, and said, what shall we do with the ark of God of Israel? Wouldn't you like to have been in that committee meeting? Literally, it said they just gathered all the lords of the Philistines together. They had a group meeting, and they said, look, we got to get rid of this thing. What in the world are we going to do with it? Remember, this is like their trophy. What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried about into Gath. And they carried the ark of God of Israel about thither. And I've got written here, instead of submitting to God of Israel at this point in time, again, reminiscence to the plagues of Egypt. Remember, how many plagues were there in Egypt? Yell it out. 10 plagues in Egypt. Every time there's a plague, you're like, why didn't Pharaoh just bow down, or why didn't Pharaoh just let him go, right? It's the same thing here. Why didn't they turn to God when Dagon fell down on his face the first time? Okay, well, why didn't they do it the second time? Now they've got hemorrhoids, and they're actually saying, okay, we're in dire straits here. We know it's because of the ark of God, but they still don't submit to God, do they? Instead of submitting to God, they decide, let's get rid of him. Let's get him out of here. But they can't get rid of God. That's the thing they don't understand. We can do things that we can push him away, but even our best attempts are only temporary. We're going to have to face God. We're all going to stand before God one day. But they make this choice to send it into a different city, and it was so that after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. So Gath got the same destruction that Ashdod did. So then they have another meeting, and they said, what are we going to do? So they sent the ark to Ekron. By this time, the people in the area knew what was coming. And people in Ekron said, and it came to pass that the ark of God came to Ekron, and the Ekronites cried out, saying, oh no, they've brought about the ark of God to us, and it's going to slay us and slay our people. Like, they didn't even want it coming into town. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel, and let it go again to its own place, that it slay us not and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. And the men that died not were smitten with emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. And the last note I've got here is that the Philistines, if they had repented and turned towards the Lord, could have benefited from the ark. You thought about that? Instead, it became a curse and a judgment to them. The same is true of the presence of God among men today, which can be as a fragrance of life to some and an aroma of death to others. So, think about that. They could have benefited from the ark, but instead they were cursed. And even today, You can benefit from God, and you can also be cursed or judged by God. Is there a middle ground? Is there a place you can be where like God just doesn't fool with you? It's really not. Now, we live in a great time at the moment where his judgments and punishments may not really come down today, but there'll be a day where that happens. But I don't think there's a middle ground, right? Either you're going to serve God and you're going to experience the good things of God and you're going to make it to heaven and you're going to live with him for eternity and have eternal life, or you're going to be cursed and judged. But there is no like third option. And I feel like the Philistines proved that to us. I think they were looking for that third option, it seemed like. Moving the ark around, trying to find a way where they could keep the ark but not have hemorrhoids. And they found out that wasn't possible. And they refused to bow down to him or serve him, so they were just going to have to get rid of it altogether. That's right. Exactly. And I think a lot of folks try to do what the Philistines are doing. How can I keep God off my back and still do what I want to do? The Philistines are like, how can we stop the hemorrhoid thing but keep the ark? How can we keep the ark but still serve Dagon? You can kind of see that in this story. And it's amazing because that same thing goes on today.
I understand the ark, top of that, was called the mercy seat too.
Mm-hmm. It was.
Instead of them fearing God, they ended up fearing death. They feared death. And the fear of the death related to, anyway. If they'd have feared God, as you're saying, and not, then they wouldn't have had the other.
That's true. That's a good point. You're going to fear something, it sounds like. She was saying that instead of fearing God, they had to now fear death and fear pain and fear all these other things, when it's just so much easier and right to just fear God. I had a reference to another scripture here I wanted to try to dig up before we finished. It's just kind of a reference back to what I just said, where it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 15, "For we are unto God a sweet savor of Christ in them that are saved and in them that perish. To the one we are the savor of death unto death, and to the other the savor of life unto life, and who is sufficient for these things." So you're either going to live for God and have life, or you're not, and you're going to experience death. It's kind of what that verse is talking about. And that's what I was saying with the Philistines. They could have turned towards God, repented, and benefited from the ark, but instead now they became cursed and judged and had to fear death, just like she was saying too. That's all 12 verses in chapter 5. We still got a few minutes if anybody wanted to add something to it. I know y'all probably read this a bunch of times. Maybe you've got something we didn't mention or cover tonight that you'd like to make a comment about.
You are familiar with the next chapter.
I am.
Go ahead and tell us how they sent it away.
All right. Well, I don't know if I want to spoil it for the next lesson. Yeah, we'll leave it a cliffhanger. I'll give you, I'm sure everybody knows, but we'll just briefly talk about it a little bit. That way you've got something to come back for. So they decide we got to get rid of this thing. It's not good enough to just keep it going around to the Philistine cities, but we need to get this back where it belongs, is what it said. Get it back to Israel. And I'm not going to go into the whole spiel, but they said that they were not going to send it back to Israel without a peace offering or something. And we just discussed what those were. Remind me, what were the two things? Say it again. Golden hemorrhoids, not just hemorrhoids. Golden ones. How many? 5 golden hemorrhoids. It's a rare, not everybody gets to stand up here and talk about hemorrhoids. So I consider myself privileged. the 5 hemorrhoids, and then what were the other things? Mice, yeah. How many mice? Was it 5 of them too? Golden ones. Now I don't know how you make a hemorrhoid. I just imagine it being like a blob of gold, I guess. I don't know. But I'm sure the way they were feeling, they didn't just any old blob do. I'm sure they took a lot of time to shape that thing and really make that into a good-looking blob. Oh, goodness gracious.
One help refers to this as skin tumors.
Yep.
That could be anyone.
Right. And that's where I was going back to the bubonic plague, was that you had more or less tumors. Your lymph nodes would swell up, and you'd have tumors in where your lymph nodes are, and you'd have some in your secret places, the Bible said, but you'd have some in other places too, and which would make sense. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying a lot of researchers and people that studied this out seem to think it was like that or something very similar to it. Also, because the mice kind of throws you in, it would make sense that they thought that the mice were, for some reason, part of this happening. So whether they figured out that they spread it, or I've even heard where people would get bit by these mice and then it would happen. And so they were putting 2 and 2 together. Of course, like I said, none of that's written down here, so I don't know, but just trying to think of what would make sense. But you're right. I was researching that too, and that came up a lot, was maybe not hemorrhoids so much as tumors. What other comments or anything you guys would like to bring up? What do you take out of it overall? All of chapter 5, a summary, like what are you going to take home with you tonight? What lesson do you learn? What lesson would you share with anybody else?
Can I share a little something? I think it is related, but when Nebuchadnezzar came in and conquered Judah and carried Daniel and the slaves back to Babylon, what was his name? The descendants of Esau, the Edomites. The Edomites was standing aside, egging it on and saying, telling them to do more to Israel, do more. And they themselves sneaked in and did a lot of harm to Israel. And although that Israel was under the judgment of God, when God brought them back, he said the Edomites was cursed forever.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had egged it on, even though the judgment was on Israel. And I absolutely don't know how I was going to put that together. But I think sometimes, well, I do too now. Even though they won this battle, and although the judgment of the Lord was up on Israel because of their disobedience, they still, God smote them because they did evil to the Israelites. And that's what I'm wondering if, again, that might have had a lot more to do with it too. Hey, you beat them, but I'm not on your side either.
Yeah. Right.
Someone
true.
said, the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend.
Right. That's true. And I think that's true, and I think the Philistines had an opportunity possibly to change that. I don't know. I don't know that, but I see that a lot in the Old Testament. I see a lot of opportunity to come to God, to know God, and back then it seemed like it was cut and dry. Though I mean, if you didn't, you got cursed and hemorrhoids or whatever. And today, only through Jesus Christ, it seems like we're shielded from that in a way. Like we're under this grace period at the moment. So we don't see this type of thing happening, but we will see it again. It's just not happening right now. There'll be a judgment day. There'll be a time for punishment. But I think maybe we take that for granted sometimes, that we can mess up, make mistakes, and do stupid things, and we're not killed because of it and struck down because of it. We have an opportunity to be shielded from that and still come back and know the Lord. But there'll be a day where that's done, and then that's not going to happen anymore. So even the Philistines, I think, had an opportunity. I mean, they obviously knew something about God, because when the ark came into the camp, they're like, uh-oh, that God's there. And then they beat them. So I think maybe they thought they were bigger and badder than the God of Israel. But God soon showed them who he was without harming them. It was once they did not submit to him, that's when he was like, okay, I'll show you even more. And then it starts to hurt a little bit.
The thing that jumped out and has just been hovering in my mind since you said it was after the first night, when they came in and found Dagon, they just set him up and went on with business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned it, that that happened with us. But we're very we can be very guilty of when God's trying to get our attention. That once things are back, okay, we're just
Business as usual.
It's just her.
That's exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I was here. I guess it was Mother's Day. It was the first service we were back in church. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And I was really, and like I said, I was here, so if there's anyone to blame, I was blaming it on myself, because you get out of service what you put in service. Great service, good message. I enjoyed being with live people again. But I really thought after, the whole time we're out, I'm thinking after 2 months of not being able to be in service, that we're going to have a humdinger of a service, and it was almost business as usual,
Mm-hmm.
and I think God was, no matter who caused all this, it doesn't really matter. As we were go back to last week, that's a moot point. When we're given an opportunity, such as we have to learn a lesson.
Yeah. It's a good point. I think we see it all the time. I think, and that's why I brought up what I brought up. I think we see it all the time where God does something that should get our attention, or maybe it does get our attention. It's how do we react to it? And I imagine everybody in here knows what it feels like to be complacent, maybe is the right word, where God's trying to do something, trying to get your attention, but we just don't feel like it. Or maybe, what does that mean if what do I need to do? Stop being comfortable, start doing something I'm not already doing. And sometimes it's just easier to be like, business as usual, let's just forget that happened. Or, we really appreciate that, God, it was awesome to see you move. And then just keep on doing what we're doing. We see that all the time today. I'm guilty of it. I'm sure a lot of folks in here would relate to that too. And sometimes you can't get around the fact that the reason for that is that it's just easier to put Dagon back on the shelf and keep on keeping on. It would be a way out of their comfort zone to switch gods. There's been a lot of work in that. So it's just easier to put the blinders on and keep on keeping on. Very good point. Anything else? Well, all right. I sure appreciate everyone coming out tonight and doing a little study with me. I always enjoy getting to do that with y'all. Hopefully the main man will be back next week. You'll have to be here. I probably will have to be here to find out too. But I've enjoyed getting to the study where I get to. So, are there any announcements need to be made before we dismiss?
We start cranking Sunday school back up this Sunday.
Sunday school starting back up this Sunday.
Sister Michelle
Did you want to make an announcement or anything about what's going on Sunday?
We'll be doing children's, we were going to do it outside, but they're giving out 93. We're going to be in the fellowship hall, parents with their children at tables, and then see how it works for at least a month, and then maybe back to regular service. That's what we're hoping.
All right.
And that's just during Sunday school. The children will be back with their parents in here with worship.
Well, that'd be a pretty big deal getting to have Sunday school again Sunday morning, so look forward to that. I believe our pastor will be back Friday. Does that sound right? Be happy to have him back too. Any other announcements? Well, all right, everybody have a safe trip.